Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Office of Emergency Management Wildfire Awareness Month webinar and Facebook Live event. We have with us today a fantastic panel of speakers from a variety of agencies and organizations that will provide information to help get you aware and prepared for fire season. But first, my name is Carrie Berger, and I'm the Fire Program Manager for Oregon State University's new Extension Fire Program. I am your host today. Extension's role is to engage people with locally relevant research-based knowledge and education and foster individual and collective action to address community vulnerability to wildfire. So how do we do that? Well, for example, in the time of COVID, we offer webinars on how to prepare yourself, your community, and the landscape for wildfire. Because as we learned from last summer's wildfires, everyone needs to be prepared. I want to pause to recognize here the tremendous impact wildfire has had on our landscapes, our economies, and on our families and communities. Some of you have had to evacuate your homes. Some of you have had to deal with weeks of unhealthy air quality, and some of you may have lost everything to wildfire. I think I speak for all of us on the panel that we are truly sorry for these losses and understand that the impacts are far from over. So let us come together and prepare. May is, after all, Wildfire Preparedness Month. The local, state, and federal wildfire agencies of Oregon, in partnership with fire prevention organizations in the state, are working together to increase awareness of wildfires. Before we get started, to avoid any noise interference, your audio has been muted. Please do keep your audio muted. You can mute yourself by using the mute button at the lower left of the screen in the Zoom platform, or if you are calling in using your phone, then please use *6. If you have a question, please type that into the chat box on the webinar platform. And if you are tuning in live with Facebook, just type your questions into the comments. We have two moderators that will be helping to feed your questions to the panelists. A huge shout out to April Davis and Chris Crabb, both public information officers with the Oregon Emergency Management Office. So after the panelists are done presenting, we will open it up for a question and answer session. So speaking of panelists, I'm super excited to introduce them to you now. So let's get started. We have with us today Doug Graff, Oregon Department of Forestry's Chief of Fire Protection. Doug will brief us on the previous and upcoming fire seasons. Then we have Claire McGrew. Claire is the Assistant Chief Deputy with the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office, and she'll be talking about preparing your home and defensible space. We also have Kristen Babbs, who is the President of Keep Oregon Green. Chris will talk with us about fire prevention. Tracy Nail, Operations and Preparedness Manager with the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, will talk about preparedness for wildfires and other emergencies. And Nathan Garraby, Deschutes County Emergency Manager, will close out the session with information on evacuation and emergency alerts. As a reminder, please put your questions into the chat or comment sections of your platform. And we are recording this event and casting live on Facebook. Okay, so let's get this event started. Chief Graff, tell us about fire season.
Thank you, Carrie, for that introduction, and thank you, colleagues, to be here today, dedicating our time and effort towards prevention and readiness for fire season. And many thanks to all Oregonians joining today. We are here in service for you all to be prepared for fire season. I'll take a moment to recognize 2020 fire season and the Labor Day event specifically that we all lived through together. I'll move quickly to what does a normal fire season look like today relative to the last 3 decades, and then we'll talk about what the outlook is moving forward. So Next slide, please. Here we go. Labor Day fires. We'll kick off. This was a tragic event where we had Oregon citizens' lives lost. We lost over 4,000 residents. We burned over 1 million acres of our natural resources within a 72-hour period wind event. And this is something we certainly want to avoid in the future. And today's Wildfire Awareness Month is about how do we prepare and organize collectively, all Oregonians pulling in the same direction to avoid conditions like this in the future, and appreciate that commitment. This was an extraordinary event, and certainly one of the worst fire seasons that we've experienced in Oregon in our history. Next slide, please. 3 decades ago, this is what the landscape of fire looked like across Oregon. A 10-year average, we saw approximately 170,000 acres burned across Oregon in between 1991 to 2000. In the next decade, next slide, please, you'll see a doubling of fire conditions across Oregon's landscape. We're averaging through this decade approximately 360,000 acres burned on a 10-year average. So you're seeing the concentration and numbers of fires and size of fires increasing. The next decade, please. Culminating with 2020, we're at 680,000 acres burned on a 10-year average. Clearly, the complexity fires across our landscape is increasing, and Oregonians pulling together for recovery, preparedness, and prevention is paramount for us to live with this fire condition, which continues to escalate. Next slide, please. So how do we stand moving into 2021 fire season? The outlook is not promising at this point. It appears to be another complex fire season coming our way. The next 3 months, temperatures are above average, in particular southwest in the nation. But you can see in Oregon above average temperatures are predicted. Next slide, please. Precipitation is below average over the next 3 months in the Pacific Northwest. And next slide, please. These conditions over the next 3 months are starting from a place where we're in drought conditions, particularly in the southern half of Oregon, southwest Oregon and southeast Oregon, out into the range country. In particular, south central around Klamath is really looking to be a hot spot as we enter into this fire season. So next slide, please. I'll close with, it takes an awful lot of folks gathering together, once again, pulling in the same direction to recover, prepare, and prevent fire season from what we've been experiencing. This session today is all about that. I am pleased to be joined with the colleagues here today to talk about how we can respond to these conditions. And this is just a few of the logos that it takes from local resources, local fire departments, tribes, to state agency departments and nonprofits to make this system work. Thank you for being here today, and I'll turn it over to the State Fire Marshal.
Thanks so much, Chief Graff. I'm Claire McGrew here from the State Fire Marshal's Office. I'm Assistant Chief Deputy of Fire and Life Safety Education. And I just wanted to start by a little bit of discussion about, as we're thinking about wildfire awareness, I wanted to touch on a couple of things of how we can start to look at our homes. Next slide, please, Corey. As we think about how fire can impact us, as Chief Graff had outlined what happened to Oregon, not only last year, but over the past several years. Fire can impact us through ember showers. Fire can impact us through direct fire impingement. And really, it's an opportunity for us to really start from our front door and think about how we can go out into our own backyards and into our own neighborhoods and really get things started. So if you look at my graphic here, the little blue house house that you have in the middle of the red square, that's really the first square that we'll start to look at. And it's really that first 5-foot zone. As you move into an extended zone there, you'll see it followed up by orange, and we'll talk about some tips on what you can do there. And then it moves into the green zone, which is kind of getting a little bit more into your driveway, into shrubs and grasses. And then there's also an extended zone, which is identified up in the upper central section of the slide as well. Next slide, please. So as we think about literally as you walk out your front door, what types of things could you do in order to impact or protect your home from wildfire? So this is zone 1A. This is an immediate zone. And so address signage is always a critical area to start. Not only is it important for firefighters who you've contacted to come into your home to help you with fire related issues, it's also a really good place for EMS. Anytime you want any kind of health response, it's a really good place. You want to make sure that they know exactly where they're going when they're pulling into your driveway. Also thinking about, again, in that immediate zone, roofs and gutters are critical in there as well. Keeping those clean will help to make sure that embers don't have an opportunity for a nice place to nestle during a wildfire, or even during or burn regulations, or any kind of debris burning that is happening as well. We want to make sure those are nice and clean. Also, as we've had some winter storms here in Oregon as well, it's a really great time to make sure that you get up there, you remove any dead branches, not only from the roof, leaves from the roof, but you want to make sure that those, as they blow up against the sides of your house, that those are moved away from there as well. Really great place to start. Again, immediately out of your front door and into that 5-foot zone immediately surrounding your home. Next slide, please, Corey. Zone 1, again, a little bit of an extension on what we just talked about. So this is 5 to 30 feet. And this is really, if it's 29 feet or 31 feet, it's some rough science here. And essentially what we're looking for here is lean, clean, and green. So we want to make sure that the grass is watered and mowed. Good guidance on this is no more than 4 inches for your grass. And then if you can't water that in the summertime, we want to make sure that that's kept nice and short. Or also sometimes there's some other alternatives such as rock or just cleaned up natural landscaping is also a great solution for that. Next slide, please. Zone 2, as we start again to wander away from that front door, your 30 to 100 foot zone, we want to have you prune up those low hanging branches. We want to make sure we call these ladder fuels, that there's nothing that, as fire could creep across your landscape, we don't give it any opportunity to creep into the upper crowns as well. It's also a good place to give your plants space as well. And I know that there'll be a resource that's dropped into the chat bar here as well that has Oregon State University has some really great fire resistive plants. So if you're looking for a great place to start, it's a great tool in that. As we think about fire resistive plants and shrubs, and we want to make sure that those are ones that don't easily ignite. Next slide, please. The last zone is this zone 3, as we call it. This is that extended zone. And so some of us that live in neighborhoods such as myself, this might not be an area that is needed in everybody's area, but it's certainly, if you have some additional property, we want to make sure that you thin and prune your trees so canopies aren't touching. We want to make sure that there's nothing that can travel between trees. And also it's a really great tip to make sure that we encourage a mixture of both deciduous and coniferous trees on your landscape as well. Thanks so much. Great tips. Thanks for joining us for Wildfire Awareness Month. And with that, I'll transition to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. My name is Chris Babbs. I'm president of the Keep Oregon Green Association, and you can learn more about who we are and what we do at keeporegongreen.org. My section of this webinar will focus on wildfire ignition sources and prevention because, as we all know, a fire prevented is a fire that doesn't need to be put out. And that saves lives, property, resources, and millions of dollars. So how do wildfires start in Oregon? Well, there are 2 leading culprits. Lightning is responsible for about 1/3 of Oregon's wildfires. Lightning is predictable because we have technology like Lightning Tracker that allows us to see where lightning hits the landscape And then that enables firefighters to pre-position their resources, monitor the area, and respond to those strikes. People, however, are the wild card. They start over 70% of Oregon's wildfires. Why is that? Well, they have more opportunity. People start fires all year round, and they start them in many ways. In fact, Oregon Department of Forestry's database categorizes over 120 specific human-caused fire ignitions. Lightning, on the other hand, is restricted to just a few months during the summer. And it's at this critical time when firefighters are super busy chasing multiple strikes and short blasts across the landscape that we ask people to be really careful and not add to a firefighter's workload with more accidental fires. In a wet year, human-caused fires are down. In a drought year, they're going to skyrocket. The weather and the drying fuels set the stage for how high or how low a number of fires and acres burned in any given year. People are going to do what they normally do. But in a drought year, the fuels conditions really drive whether a person has the ability to control an escaped fire themselves or if they've got to call 911. If there are multiple fires burning elsewhere around the state and firefighting capacity is stretched thin, please be warned that help may not arrive. So how do fires start? The number one issue that we have in our state is debris burning. It's important to set up a burn pile correctly. You got to stay with it and you have to put it out completely. Burning during fire season is prohibited. We encourage people to cover their debris pile, especially with this last ice storm, get it all dried out over the summertime and wait until the fall rainy season to burn that pile safely. That is if burning is your only option. Chipping and recycling debris is a much safer bet. Equipment fires are the second leading cause of wildfires in Oregon. We see cars with hot exhaust systems parked or idling over tall, dry grass. Vehicles are throwing carbon sparks into dry vegetation. Lawnmowers with their spinning metal blades are striking rocks and sparking fires. And then also the refueling of hot power equipment can also take a bad turn. So again, it's important to pay attention to the restrictions, the conditions, and the weather. If you can visualize your activity starting a fire, it just might. Campfires are the third leading cause of fires in our state. People light a campfire in the morning, and a half extinguished unattended campfire is a recipe for disaster as the day starts to warm and the winds pick up. So as Smokey Bear says, drown, stir, drown that fire until it's absolutely dead out. And then here are some other sources of wildfire: smoking, target shooting, fireworks. If you want to see a full list of ways that wildfires start in Oregon, check out our website and you can learn more ways on how to prevent them. So how do we stop human-caused fires? Well, it starts near the home, as Claire said. If you have good defensible space around your house, an accidental fire won't spread because there's no fuel to carry that flame. Next is about risk perception. I commonly hear, well, I've always burned debris and I've never had an issue, or I've always done fill in the blank, never had a problem. If you're ever in doubt, call your local fire authority before burning or doing any kind of risky activity. If you're planning to visit Oregon's beautiful landscape this summer and do some camping or recreation, call ahead to that recreation destination and find out if there are any restrictions in place. Distractions and shortcuts also lead to wildfires. But again, if you set it up right, if you stay with your activity, whatever that may be, and then put out that fire, whether it's debris burning or campfires, you're going to eliminate a lot of the risk. Always have fire tools on hand. If you're doing some kind of activity that can send sparks into dry grass, carry these tools with you in your car, have them on hand, be prepared. And then lastly, think about alternatives to some of these traditional activities. Perhaps use a camp stove instead of a campfire. Chip or haul your debris to the landfill instead of burning it. Again, if the weather and conditions look risky, we ask that you wait on all of those activities that could spark a fire. Just wait until it's a safer time to do what you think you need to do. There are a lot of great preparedness and prevention resources in the chat. Encourage you to see that. That's my presentation. I will toss it over to Tracy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tracy Nail. I'm the Operations and Preparedness Section Manager for the Oregon Office of Emergency Management. I'm going to spend just a few minutes reviewing some tips about how to prepare your home and how to think about evacuations related to wildfires. Most of these tips also apply to other disasters too, so please keep that in mind as you get your wildfire plan ready to go. The first thing is having a plan. Make sure that you've talked with everyone in your household and that everybody understands what needs to be done if you have to evacuate quickly. A couple of things to consider are not just the areas around your home and those evacuation routes, but what do you do if you have an evacuation from your office or your children's daycare, other places that you frequent fairly often. That way you know which way to go, what your routes are, how you're going to meet up with your family. Those are all things to think about with your emergency plan. Also consider what the latest guidance is related to COVID-19. That may affect where you choose to go, where your rally point is, where you plan to meet up with your family. So keep those things in mind as you look at your emergency plan. Also part of this should be reviewing those documents that you may need and having a way to access those alternatively if you can't get to your paper copies that may be stored at your home or at your office. So those are things like your insurance policies, your identification, anything else that you would need, potentially prescriptions or other items that you would have to have documentation for, as you're evacuating and need to show who you are and also contact those important contacts like your insurance agents. So one thing you can do with those documents is make those copies and store them somewhere where you have a password protected space digitally to get to them. I use an app on my phone that I have everything protected, but I have copies of everything that's in my wallet and other important documents so I can refer to them very quickly if needed, since I more than likely am going to have my phone with me anytime that I go anywhere. So, this goes back to a little bit on Claire's presentation about strengthening your home. So think about how you can use those fire resistant materials, use those best practices to clear the area around your home. And consider what are your outdoor water sources in case you have to hook up a hose. How do you make that space, again, around your home? How do you make that safe? And one thing you can do that's really more interior to your home is designate a space that you can have that would kind of be your smoke-free space. Where you can close all the doors, all of the windows, and potentially set up a portable air cleaner. That's something you can do inside in addition to protecting your home from the outside. And that way you have a comfortable space and hopefully can minimize the pollution levels if you're in an area but with a fire, but you haven't had to evacuate yet. Also, make sure that you are thinking about your supplies. Make sure you have your 2 weeks worth of supplies ready to go and that you are, have those first aid supplies, you have your prescriptions, you have dog food, cat food, anything you need to take care of your pets, that you have, your supplies to help with COVID if you have to evacuate to a crowded area, disinfectants, masks, clothes, any of those food, any food items. So be ready to evacuate with those supplies, but also be ready to try to sustain yourself for a couple of weeks at a time. And we recommend as OEM 2 weeks ready as part of our 2 weeks ready program. And that way you can, avoid having to go into a crowded area or put additional strain on things like our healthcare system when you just have minor first aid events you have to take care of. Build those supplies up slowly. Build up your supplies of water, your supplies of food or other essentials that you may need. You don't have to buy everything all at once. And that also helps us when, we do have times where there may be supply shortages. If you stock up a little bit at a time ahead of time, then you help alleviate that burden on our supply chain as well. A couple of things to consider with COVID in this particular environment, again, making sure you have the masks. Make sure you have masks that will protect you and the others around you, like we're all used to wearing now with our cloth face coverings. Consider if you are going to set aside a respirator like an N95 mask, that you want to do that, very judiciously. We want to make sure those supplies are available for first responders and healthcare workers that would need them as well. So, again, thinking about planning ahead and trying not to buy those things at the last minute so that the supplies are available for other people who would need them as well. A couple other things to think about when you're evacuating or building up supplies in your home. Consider where you are storing them. And then make sure you don't have anything combustible that's in an area that could become dangerous to your house. And finally, make sure as part of your supplies, you have your cell phone charged. That will have you ready to go if you do have to evacuate or call for any assistance or check any alerts or anything. And that's an important part of actually having that evacuation plan. And that is actually where I'm also going to hand off to Nathan Garrity, because he's going to talk with you more about planning for evacuations and what that looks like, as well as emergency alerts.
Well, thank you, Tracy. Great setup. I appreciate that. My name is Nathan Garrity. I'm the emergency manager here in Deschutes County, and I work for the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office. I'm honored to be the local emergency management representative on this panel, and really excited about the information that we can share, and hopefully it prompts you to do a little bit more work at home and prepare your families. It takes the entire community to be prepared for any disaster, including wildfires. I just wanted to really kick off with talking a little bit about fire evacuation in Oregon. Since 2014, Oregon has used a 3-level ready, set, go evacuation system, and that's pretty consistent throughout the state. These evacuation decisions and orders or notices are issued by, in most cases, by local law enforcement, but that's in close cooperation with fire managers. There's a number of factors that go into issuing evacuation notices, when and where, but those are really indicated or determined based on current and expected fire behavior and a number of other factors. In some cases, these evacuations can happen so rapidly that effective warning may not be able to be issued to you. So if at any point you see fire in your neighborhood and you feel threatened by wildfire, please go ahead and evacuate if you believe that's what you need to do to protect your family. We don't necessarily want you to wait for the official warning. So getting back to those 3-level or that 3-level evacuation system, it's level 1 is ready. And that really means that there's an event occurring in your neighborhood. And again, this doesn't have to be fire, but typically we talk about fire in these events, that there's a fire in your area and that you need to just pay close attention, monitor local media, start watching official public safety and emergency management social media sites and websites. And this may also be a time for some precautionary movement of vulnerable populations, livestock, particularly if it's going to take you some extended time to get either people or your livestock out of harm's way. If conditions do worsen, emergency services will make every effort to contact you and to notify you that you need to evacuate. Level 2 is means you need to be set to evacuate. Really, that means that it could change at any moment, and there is significant danger in your area, and that you should either voluntarily evacuate at that time, but you should certainly be ready. So this is the time, if you're not going to go ahead and evacuate at level 2, that you would gather your kits and the things that Tracy had mentioned, that you put them in your vehicle, that you back your vehicle into your driveway and be ready to go at a moment's notice. And finally, level 3 is a go now evacuation. And that really means that danger is imminent and that you need to evacuate now. Really the time to do any preparations around your home, that time is past. And really it's important to recognize that if you don't follow that advisement or that advisory, that emergency services may not be able to assist you any further. So we really do recommend people to leave at a level 3 or a go now evacuation without delay. It is also important to recognize that sometimes these evacuations go straight to level 3. And so we don't want you to think that it's always an orderly level 1, ready to set, go. That sometimes based on the circumstances, it's a go now evacuation from the very, very beginning. So we do want you to recognize that. Now, how do you know whether you need to evacuate? So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide. And we're going to talk a little bit about alerts and warnings. So it's important for you to recognize in your community where those alerts come from. In almost all areas in Oregon, local emergency management or public safety or 911 has the ability to notify you through a mass notification system of some sort. That usually comes in the form of texts, emails, phone calls, and we are continually striving to improve those systems to make sure that people are getting the notices they need. So you'll need to register for those alerts. There's a number of other ways that we can notify you, such as social media. We do ask you that you look for official social media sites. You can always monitor your local media, and our local media partners are fantastic at helping us get the word out and sharing critical information. You can go to the Flash Alert website. Many communities in Oregon utilize Flash Alerts, which you can see the direct press releases coming out from public safety. And then you can also monitor NOAA weather radio. That can oftentimes give you information about weather conditions and how that may impact fire spread, particularly in the summer during red flag warnings. The one thing I do want to add on this is if you do sign up for a local emergency alerts, that you do need to maintain your profile. Make sure that if you move or you change numbers, that you get that updated. All right, and then we're going to talk a little bit about integrated public alert and warning. So if you have ever received one of these, they are a very loud alert on your phone, similar to an Amber Alert. These can be, that's a WE alert. So if you get that screaming noise on your phone, it'll give you an emergency alert. Those actually can be sent out by approved senders. And there's a number of those in Oregon to notify you of an emergency. And these actually are geographic based. So whether you've signed up or not for a local emergency alert, you may receive these. Now it's important for you to go into your phone and into the settings. I think there's a link in the material that's being provided to make sure that you know how to do that. If not, you can always check with your local phone company or your either your iPhone or Android device, and you can Google that and learn how to check that and make sure that you're signed up for those or that those are enabled. Those are critically important. We can also use the emergency alert system, which is that banner across the television and the alerts over the broadcast radio. And then finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about where to go to get information about air quality, and particularly during significant fire seasons or when there's large fires on the landscape. Oftentimes air quality is impacted, as we saw last fall. And it really is important for you to be aware of what the air quality is so that you can take actions to protect you and your family. And particularly if you are vulnerable or you have respiratory conditions. And there's a couple websites there, Air Now and Oregon DEQ, Oregon Air sites, and those links are in the chat. So feel free to take a look at those and bookmark those so that you can go back to those sites when there is fires and when there are air quality concerns to gauge your risk locally. And with that, I think I'm kicking it back to Carrie for some Q&A.
That's right. Thank you so much, Nathan. And thank you to all the presenters. You all provided a lot of great information. At this time, we're going to open it up for questions from you all, so that if you haven't already, please do get those questions placed into the chat, or if you are on Facebook, type your question into the comment section. So April or Chris, do we have any questions to start us off?
Hi, everyone. Kathleen says that every year the alerts on TV work, but they don't include where exactly the fire is. For example, a Google Maps set of directions. Is that something that could be included?
Carrie, I'll go ahead and take that one. There's a number of resources that you can look for fire locations and evacuation zones. One that is statewide is Raptor, and I believe we have that link also that can be put in the chat. But then a number of local governments, Deschutes County included, also put those on a map. So if you're in our county, you can go, you can bookmark our site, and we try to get that updated as quickly as possible during an event. But do recognize sometimes they happen so fast that it takes us a few minutes or a little bit of time to get those up, but we try to get those up as quickly as possible. And then Raptor is a great source to aggregate those throughout the state.
Thanks, Nathan. Crystal is asking, what if the power is out? No cell or tower service to receive the evacuation notice. This happened during the holiday farm fire.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, that is one of the reasons why we certainly encourage people that if they have not received an official warning, but they definitely feel threatened or they see fire in the area, that to go ahead and evacuate, because sometimes infrastructure can be impacted and can prevent some of those warnings from getting out. In most cases, law enforcement will also attempt door-to-door notifications. But recognizing in rapidly evolving and dynamic situations, those can be impacted. And, really depending on the circumstances, there are a number of tools to notify the community, but we do certainly encourage you to take those measures to protect your family, even if you haven't heard any official notice.
Chris wants to know, what is the typical role that the local CERT, C-E-R-T members have in a wildfire evacuation situation here in Oregon?
So again, that's going to be really community dependent. Some communities utilize their CERT volunteers to assist in evacuations or to support temporary evacuation points, or possibly even help direct traffic. And so you'll really need to reach out to your local CERT chapter if you have one in your community, and determine how you can assist them with that, or volunteer as a CERT member to help.
Carrie, Doug Graff here. I might just add, this is a really good opportunity to recognize that all emergencies begin and end locally. So engaging in programs like CERT and understanding where to gather information from local resources is paramount. Statewide resources, nationwide resources, up and through military assets, arrive and support an incident. But the fact of the matter is every incident begins and ends locally. So ensuring that we've got a strong bond in emergency response locally is imperative, and CERT's a great program to get involved and understand how that operation works in your community.
Thank you for that, Doug. Chris, April, are we getting any other questions coming in?
We haven't gotten any on Facebook Live yet, so I'll throw it over here to Chris to check.
I've got a couple more. What is your position on home protection during a crisis, or even if you have the infrastructure, is it better just to leave it?
This is Claire. I can go ahead and take that one. So always a better opportunity is to prepare the home in order to leave it, home and structures. Of course, if you have barns or anything else on your property, we really want to make sure that we have the opportunity for the structure to be able to survive in its own space. And we really want to make sure that we have people that are able to get out into a safe area. Oftentimes what can happen is those that stay behind also will require firefighters and law enforcement and other emergency first responders to be able to go back into that area to assist. And so we really want to make sure that we get people out first. That's always the priority. Again, so just to highlight the position of staying to protect the structure is something that we would rather leave to the first responders that are going in there after we've got the people out.
And this one's kind of interesting. For the last evacuation, the enlarged Clackamas County map showed north of Highway 211, our house and front of property were in level 1, but the rear of our property was in level 3. We received the evacuation alert on our cell phones. Were we correct to determine that the alert was the deciding factor that we should evacuate?
So that comes up almost every evacuation, because there's these lines that get drawn, and sometimes it bisects properties. So that's a great question. What I would say is always err on the side of caution. So if you're that close to the line and you get an alert, I would err on the side of following the alert and going ahead to evacuate. So sounds like you did the right thing, and hopefully your property was safe and protected, and your family was as well.
We had one came in via email, and I posted it there to the chat. I don't know if you can see it, Cece, or if you need me to read it.
Yep, I can see it. Okay. Jillian asks, last fall, there were wildfires in places that would have been unheard of before, such as the Echo Mountain fire on the coast. How are you preparing for more fires in places where people are simply unprepared for one because they've never happened before? And can you also talk about these fires in such unusual places?
This is Doug Graff. I think I'll kick it off with the recognition that the Oregon landscape is changing, and preparedness for fire conditions across the state is really necessary statewide. The legislature and the governor's office and Oregonians have acted with the Governor's Wildfire Council recommendations. That is our roadmap moving forward. The legislature is deliberating on advancements in fire protection, including additional capacity so we can reach more places, provide more effort in all communities statewide relative to community wildfire protections, and mitigating the catastrophic risk of wildfire with fuel reduction projects across the state. So those investments and energies are expanding across the state with the recognition of those 3 decadal maps I highlighted. Fires are statewide, certainly more concentrated in areas in Southwest Oregon and Eastern Oregon, but we are seeing those fires across the landscape. And once again, I'd make a plug for that local emergency management, getting engaged with your community, understanding each county in the state has community wildfire protection planning efforts going on, and remaining engaged. So certainly increased awareness across the board is necessary.
This is just a comment, but I'm going to share it. You all do an excellent job with the live wildfire evacuation maps, especially in last year's catastrophic statewide event. They were heavily relied on upon getting people and livestock to safety. So Christy, thank you for that.
April, any comments coming in from Facebook? Facebook friends, don't be shy. Get your comments into the comment section.
I'm not seeing any come in quite just yet, but we had another one from email that I can read out.
Please.
This comes from Christy. Thank you for joining, or excuse me. I'm looking forward to the presentation today. I wonder if there are any scheduled statewide disaster planning exercises for facilities. I can tell you firsthand during the wildfires and the recent snow and ice storms, group homes, nursing homes, adult foster homes, and assisted living facilities relied on the fire department for evacuation. It was made worse during the ice storm where many facilities had no backup generator. I feel like there's an opportunity to get out in front of this with the right focus going forward. So to sum that up, are there any disaster or evacuation plans that folks can find online and do training exercises to prepare?
This is Claire. I will touch on parts of that. I don't know that we have anything available on our website. That certainly has been something that we've been discussing in-house. Also, I appreciate the comment as well, because I think the more that we get feedback from community members as well, the more that it helps us to really truly consider what it is that is needed out there in the environment as well. I know that there are some national plans that are available as far as templates, but I don't have anything that I could directly point to. But again, I do appreciate the comment with this piece as well. Thank you.
I have a couple more. Rick lives within a national forest. What agency would cover his property for fire?
Doug Graff here. Rick, living next to the National Forest, the U.S. Forest Service would have responsibility for that protection responsibility. But the reality, fire knows no boundary. And in the state of Oregon, we all work collaboratively. And it begins with over 300 local fire departments that serve our communities. Department of Forestry protects about 16 million acres forested landscape grazing across the state, and Forest Service protects about 16 million acres also. National Park and Crater Lake, tribal lands, the rangeland in southeast Oregon, along with Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, all have responsibility, and we partner on a daily basis to track all fires across the state and move resources accordingly where needed. But right against your home, next to the Forest Service, that's the folks to connect with closely if you have any questions around response to your region.
And I would like to throw a quick plug in after you, Doug, just to mention Oregon State University's Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer tool. This is a great tool where you can go to the homeowner portal, you can type in your address, and when you look at the homeowner's report, you will see on page 2 who the fire response is for your particular property. It will list Oregon Department of Forestry, you know, your particular town's local fire department. It will list them from kind of like the wildland down to the local level.
All right, I have a couple more I'm going to get out before we run out of time. Brian wants to know thoughts on carpooling during evacuations. No one wants to leave their vehicles behind, but he imagines it would reduce traffic on evacuation routes and eventually prevent bottlenecks. Any thoughts on that?
So that's a good thought. I'm really going to say it really depends on your neighborhood and the makeup and the demographics. So to that point, though, I would certainly encourage you to talk with your neighbors and people in your neighborhood, and particularly those that may have difficulty driving or may not have their own vehicle, to absolutely connect with them and consider them in part of your evacuation plan, and take your neighbors out with you if they have no other means to get out. As far as carpooling in general, really, that would be more likely in more urbanized areas. In most of the rural areas, that's probably not realistic, but I think it's probably a good discussion to have with your neighbors and in your community, and there might be some good reason to consider that as part of your personal evacuation plan.
Thanks, Nathan. Kate wonders, is it a reasonable expectation that large animal owners remove their animals as soon as they receive the first evacuation notice? And she adds, this is more a comment, I'd like to see large animal transport be strongly associated with ready so that set and go are focused on other preparedness tasks.
That's a great point. I think that is why we include that it is the time for precautionary movement of livestock. But again, each circumstance is different. Each property is different. It may not be reasonable to move all your livestock, so you may have to look at other protective measures for your livestock. If you have 1 or 2 horses and you can quickly get them into a 2-place trailer and take them out with you, probably a great idea. But again, depending on your property and your situation, that may vary.
So maybe we have time for another question, Chris or April. Do you have one more that's come in?
That last question was from Facebook. I'm not seeing any others.
And I've got one right here. The leaders in our subdivision are demanding that we cut down all of the trees less than 8 inches in diameter and all sagebrush, deer brush 30 feet out from our houses. Is that your recommendation?
Doug Graff here. Go ahead.
No,
Claire.
that's all right.
I think really you need to get on the ground locally with local fire department and local ODF department, fire risk, and to take a look specifically at the ground. I wouldn't want to answer that without, walking the ground and understanding the wildfire risk of the region. And so.
I would just add to Chief Graff's comments as well, just in support of that. It's difficult to be able to apply like a broad brush stroke over this as well. There certainly is a clear clear thoughts that we want to make sure that we're not moonscaping, we're not looking at any of those pieces, but we certainly want to make sure that we leave space in things. And so that's really a good general guidance as well, because and again, it depends on topography, it depends on your subdivision as well. So certainly something that would be need to be locally addressed.
Great. Well, if
Do
we
Do we have time for one more, Carrie?
let's do it. Let's
Okay.
ask one more.
The recent ice storm resulted in massive amounts of woody debris. Our forested neighborhood in unincorporated Clackamas County is still cleaning up, and some folks burn green wood nearly every single day, creating more fire risk and air quality issues. The garbage recycling provider does not offer unincorporated areas green waste service. Is there anything the county is planning to do for future storm events to help landowners find alternatives to burning?
I can't speak for Clackamas County, but a number of counties and fire districts, as well as, and Doug might cover some projects that ODF does, but a number of counties do provide services, grant funds to support removal of woody debris on their properties. I would first reach out to your local fire district or your county emergency management organization. They may have information to direct you, and I believe ODF has some programs as well, but maybe I'm speaking out of school, Doug.
No, Nathan, you're accurate. I think the bottom line is it's really important to seek alternatives. Just a smoke issue, but as Chris Babbs, Keep Oregon Green mentioned, that's our number one human caused fire is debris burning. So, finding alternatives, that is critically important. And I imagine each county has varying levels of capacity, and ODF certainly works through some chipping programs when we have dollars available to do those programs within regions. So really got to address that locally, but you're onto the right topic.
As I mentioned in my presentation, it's best to cover those piles right now. The wood is too green to burn. And the risk is that those piles could possibly hold and retain that heat until we get into June and July and potentially rekindle on a warm, windy day. And then we've got some risks there. So it's really best to cover that green debris right now, let it dry out, and wait until the fall. When we get the fall rains, it's a damp environment around that pile and it's safer to burn. But again, I would, as everybody's mentioned here, every county is different. Every county has different services available for chipping or free hauling of debris to a landfill. So it's worth, again, it's kind of that, individual preparedness for wildfire, but also community preparedness for wildfire, talking with your neighbors and getting them all on board about preparation and what needs to be done ahead of this fire season and future fire seasons.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much for that. And so I think I'm going to close this out now. There's a lot of great questions, but if we didn't get your question answered, please do email us at fire.info@state.or.us, and perhaps April or Chris could put that link into the chat, and we'll be sure to get your questions answered. Thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists, but importantly, thank you for joining in and participating in this very important conversation. May is Wildfire Awareness Month in Oregon, and let's all do our part to protect what is ours and what we love. Please stay safe out there. Thank you.